Remember when the first Overwatch came out? How about Overwatch 2?
What the f, dude? Come on.
Overwatch 1 was beloved from the start, receiving high praise from players everywhere. But the sequel has received nothing but criticism, being review bombed to the lowest rated game on Steam. What's weird though is the games are practically the same, with Overwatch 2 actually fixing many of the issues that plagued the original. Yet players with thousands of hours in the game are leaving. Despite being a great game with millions of dollars behind it, Blizzard is killing their most popular franchise. To understand what went wrong, we have to jump back to the 2000s, back to when Team Fortress 2 was the king of hero shooters. Overwatch may have been the first of its kind, but TF2 was the inspiration. From gameplay to cool maps and unique cast of characters, Overwatch basically took the TF2 formula and sprinkled in some League of Legends. I mean, even the Overwatch character trailers can be traced back to TF2, with Valve creating iconic characters, each with their own distinct identity and personality. People loved these guys, and how could you not? Their short films were gold.
I hurt people. Boink! I'm a force of nature. Bonk!
Although Overwatch didn't lean into humor as much as Team Fortress, these trailers were epic. The game just presented this world that felt so real and unique, with characters you understood and stories that deserved feature-length films. I mean, it's hard creating iconic characters. Now make 32 of them. On top of all that, Overwatch delivered some of the best moments in gaming. When you and your friends could devise a strategy, some combination of ultimates to completely wipe the other team and take that W. Yet nothing came close to that feeling. And all this excitement led to Overwatch selling over 50 million copies, despite being an online shooter with no campaign. The popularity and reception made Overwatch the game of the year. But the game wasn't without its problems. It suffered from poor balancing and power creep. Some characters like Brigitte released in such a broken state that the entire game suddenly revolved around her, often being called the GOAT's meta.
Lost here for the Outlaws.
From Grands to Bronze, the game suffered from these imbalances. And if you played alone, you better get comfortable playing a healer or tank, because most people would just insta-lock their favorite character, with no plans of working as a team. The side with even a hint of cohesion would usually win, simply by just having the right characters, making solo queuing more dependent on chance than on skill. But with time, the developers addressed and resolved these issues. Power creep was gradually removed, and the GOAT was slowly brought to a reasonable level after an unbelievable amount of nerfs. The developers then introduced role queue, which allowed players to pick a role they wanted before they even got in the game, eliminating the conflict of role cohesion. It reduced a bit of creativity, but was ultimately a huge improvement for the game's health. Overwatch 1 had its issues, don't get me wrong, but players stuck through it because they just loved the game. Overwatch was a monumental achievement. From its gameplay to esports, everything just worked. The future was bright for Overwatch and Blizzard. So they looked to the future, thinking about how they could turn Overwatch into a massive franchise, something to rival Warcraft. There were huge plans for what was to come, plans that would ultimately destroy what Blizzard had spent years building.
Oh,
The game meant to continue the legacy, and fans were blown away by what they saw. A whole campaign set in the Overwatch universe. People couldn't believe it. Overwatch 1 had previously dabbled with story content in the form of archive missions, but these were short, few, and only available in a limited period of time. But here, Blizzard was showing something else entirely. Co-op mission ability upgrades, skill trees, new cutscenes, new characters, new maps, new story, and so much more. Not only was this exciting for hardcore competitive fans, but this was perfect for that casual audience that Overwatch attracted. A campaign to play with friends, with characters we knew and loved, broadening that appeal of Overwatch beyond the shooter genre into a casual and co-op space. The potential was unparalleled, and Overwatch 2 seemed like the beginning of something huge. But it needed to be this way, because fans were about to enter the season of drought. Since Overwatch released in 2016, every year brought brand new heroes and multiple maps. Each hero had their own lore, exciting trailer, and it seemed like there was always something to talk about. But after Overwatch 2 was announced in November 2019, content dried up. There was only one new hero in 2020, and that was it. Nothing else was released for the rest of Overwatch 1's lifespan. For 2.5 years, players received practically nothing. There were no new maps, outside of a handful of deathmatch maps, and no new heroes. Maybe a skin every few months, but content dried up. But there was good reason for this, or so the players thought. The developers were focused exclusively on Overwatch 2, directing all of their attention on what they had promised. We were happy to wander the desert and wait for our promised campaign. So the hype slowly began to wane, and players endured. Overwatch was practically dead from a development standpoint, and players were desperate for anything new, anything to talk about. Dedicated content creators had gradually decreasing views, and some moved on entirely. Nonetheless, many players stuck around, enticed by the promise of tomorrow. They knew more was coming, they just had to wait. And after 2.5 years of waiting, we finally got our hands on Overwatch 2. Real quick, before I talk about the bad, let's start with the good. The gameplay loop had been overhauled to be faster paced and more fun. Blizzard removed one of the tank roles, making each team 5 players instead of 6, and nearly every character received some rework, with the tanks feeling more powerful and impactful than ever before. Not to mention the game mode Assault was removed entirely, a notorious map which by design led to unbalanced one-sided matches and was, thank goodness, replaced by a far more enjoyable game mode Push. But players realized that something was off. Those story missions that everyone was so excited about were nowhere to be seen. It turns out fans still had to wait another year before they would be added. Blizzard assured players it was on the way, but it was just going to take a little bit longer. So after waiting 2.5 years of no content, Overwatch 2 was essentially a glorified update. It was great content for players, but they were expecting more from this sequel. Most of what was added and changed was for the better, except perhaps one thing. The game was fundamentally changed from premium to free-to-play. Blizzard saw the success of their competitors like Apex, Valorant, Fortnite, and they realized Overwatch was under-monetized.
We want more money.
The first game was developed during the rise of free-to-play, so it retained a more old-style monetization model, selling copies for $40 a pop. But they realized they could make way more money from a free-to-play model, maximizing their player base and placing in-game content behind a paywall. So Overwatch 2 changed their model to better match the status quo of the industry. Limited time skins, a battle pass, a premium currency, the whole 9 yards. And fans were not happy.
Activision, come on, man. Put more effort into these things or drop the prices a little bit.
Even though it was technically a new game, it didn't feel like it. With no story content, Blizzard had just updated Overwatch 1 and slapped a new number on it. The game did add new cosmetics like mythic skins, but paying for them felt so jarring. For fans who used to get all these skins for free, we're habitual creatures, and getting Overwatch players to purchase skins was an uphill battle. Not to mention they were absurdly priced, with a single skin costing upwards of $20. Players missed loot boxes. As crazy as that sounds, players found buying skins unnatural, and the price was set far too high. But that's just where the problems begin. The monetization changed how we experience the game, and for the worse. Only 13 of the 35 heroes are available for new players, and to unlock characters, you have to purchase the battle pass. Why is this a problem? Well, unlike every other hero-based game, Overwatch is balanced around swapping and coordination. Certain heroes counter other heroes, so it's common to make several character swaps during a single game. So having to purchase heroes inherently made Overwatch pay to win, at least in some aspect. So the community was pissed. The game they loved was being corrupted, along with the fact that there was still no campaign or PvE content. So they found themselves back at the same point they were 2+ years ago, trusting Blizzard to deliver on their promise. They didn't. During one developer livestream, it was casually announced that the team
can't deliver on that original vision.
They had to scrap much of what they had promised. Skill trees, long-term progression, almost everything PvE, so much of what was promised was gone.
What that means is that we won't be delivering that dedicated hero mode with talent trees, that long-term power progression. Those things just aren't in our plans anymore.
What replaced it was much smaller campaigns similar to the archive missions from the first game. But this time, you had to pay.
Then what is the plans then?
Despite spending 4 years on the project, Blizzard was scrapping the biggest features they had hyped in 2019.
We went through 3 years of Overwatch 1. We're not even gonna count 2019, even though 2019 they'd already kind of shifted away. Literally, we played the most dead, non-existent, left alone game.
This was the final straw. Blizzard defaulted on their loan of promises, and players were pulling out. dedicated fans with thousands of hours put the game down.
It's pretty much a nail in the coffin for me when it comes to Overwatch. I'm done with it, man.
All of that waiting was for nothing. At this point, it didn't matter how fun the game was or what PvE turned out to be, because the damage had been done to consumers' perception of the game. Blizzard just got people's hopes up to then crush them after years of waiting. But why did all this happen? Blizzard has billions of dollars to produce games and had a much larger Overwatch dev team than they did before, yet they couldn't make a campaign in 4 years. I mean, they literally have the stories and the cast of characters already designed. Most of the pre-production was done. They just needed to execute. Sadly though, it didn't come down to capacity, it came down to willingness and studio conflict. Overwatch 1 came from a different time in gaming, before Blizzard was only focused on maximizing profit. I mean, despite terrible reception and almost a decade of memes,
Do you guys not have phones? Yeah.
Diablo Immortal was making over $1 million a day. The original development team wanted to invest in a massive game, but this clashed with Blizzard's new perspective on revenue.
The anonymous source says the cancellation was 1000% an upper management executive issue.
It just didn't make sense to invest so much in PvE when they can make way more money investing in PvP. There was other factors at play disrupting development, like the pandemic and Blizzard lawsuits, but ultimately it came down to developers trying to create a proper game, fighting with executives who just wanted to print money. Ironically, if the developers held back on their ambitions, focused on developing content for Overwatch 1, and then announced Overwatch 2 as an overhaul to PvP with no story content, Overwatch 2 would have fared far better. We would have less content for sure, but the perception and trust towards Overwatch would still be intact. For a company, that is more valuable than any story mission or piece of content. Trust. 95% of consumers' purchases are emotional. There's some rational decisions involved, but the final decision usually comes down to how you feel. So as the perception of Overwatch got worse and worse, it turned people away. Even though the gameplay loop is still fantastic, the brand's perception and the feelings associated are what people think of, which taints all aspects of Overwatch. That's why a game that's technically great is dying and loathed by the gaming community. Borrowed trust that wasn't fulfilled. Players don't hate this game. Most of them love Overwatch. They love the characters and crunchy gameplay, but they hate how Blizzard has handled the game. And that notoriety has gone far beyond into the wider gaming community. Overwatch is now synonymous with poor management, greedy practices, and broken promises. A game that shouldn't be dying, but is. Thanks everyone who stuck to the end. For anyone that doesn't know, we like to pick an indie game to highlight at the end of each of our videos to try giving them some recognition. This week's highlight is FTL, a spaceship game that's complex and incredibly strategic. Don't let the simple graphics deceive you. FTL is one of the best games out there. It's fun and addicting. Not to mention the experience changes every time since it's a roguelike. So go pick up a copy of FTL and take your ship on an adventure through a randomly generated galaxy. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.